Since 1922 and the foundation of the Irish state, 10,000 girls and women passed through the institutions known as the Magdalene laundries. Now, the report that was of a group chaired by Senator Magdalene was released a few weeks ago, and it shows how the state was directly responsible for about 1/4 of the entrance to those institutions. They were sent there by the courts, in many cases on remand, or after conviction for usually petty offences. They were referred by social services, where children, for example, needed accommodation away from abusive homes or neglectful backgrounds. The report states that many others finished up in the Magdalene institutions because they, quote, were poor and homeless, unquote, or had, quote, psychiatric illnesses and were referred from psychiatric hospitals, end quote. Now, what is quite clear is that the Magdalene institutions, which were initiated and thrived in the Victorian era of the 19th century, became essentially social institutions for a dysfunctional new Irish state. And the reality is that the brave new Ireland, led by the petty bourgeoisie and the gombeen men of the day, was in reality a crisis-ridden, backward capitalist state, unable to meet the basic needs of its people, dominated by a weak economic and a weak political establishment. Now, critical to the survival of that weak economic and political establishment was the support of the Catholic Church. And the reality is that Cosgrave's Ireland and De Valera's Ireland and John A. Costello's Ireland was a state in reality that lent on the Catholic Church as a crutch to prop it up, that lent on it as a crutch for legitimacy, and in turn this church and its hierarchy were given control over whole pillars of society, health and hospitals, for example, schools, primary, secondary, and institutions like the Magdalene laundries. Now, the Ireland of the day, the Ireland of the 1920s to the 1960s, groaned under the weight of oppressive moral strictures and the suffocating power of the Catholic Church. But we now know that in reality, from the revelations of institutional abuse, including that of the Magdalene women, that at the rotten heart of the establishment of this Ireland, there was no morality. Right-wing politicians, religious, and media all colluded together in maintaining the obscurantist dark age that helped to secure their control over a poverty-ridden state, unable to meet the needs of its people, where 1 million of its people were pushed out into enforced emigration, where enormous suffering happened as a result of poverty and deprivation. And in order to prevent people rising in revolt, the establishment of the day lent primarily on the Catholic Church, which used its authority to legitimize a failed state in reality. Now, today's political establishment finds it safe to criticize its predecessors for the cruelty that they imposed on those who were poor and powerless in the Ireland of the 1920s up to the 1960s. I have to say that to me, the apologies, the contritions, the alleged identification with the suffering of the victims of the institutions of church and state ring hollow in my ears. There is a total moral paradox, in fact, in relation to the political establishment of today in its attitude to the past and the cruelty of the past, which it criticizes, and on the other hand, its promotion of the cruel austerity policies that they push through in response to the crisis of the present day. The same system in this present time. And the choreographed apologies, the carefully crafted speeches with cues as to where the speaker should pause for effect, maybe even an instruction to shed a tear, amount to a false and an artificial and a manufactured contrition to meet the demands of the majority of the decent people of our society today who are genuinely moved by the suffering of the victims of a cruel Irish state. But the paradox here is that the same harsh morality that deemed thousands of women should slave in the Magdalene laundries, and that thousands of poor and homeless and powerless should be incarcerated in other institutions and cruelly abused, that morality today is evident in a different way. A few months ago, people with severe disabilities had to bring themselves down in front of government buildings to fight cruel cuts to their facilities. This very morning, the government of the Magdalene apology of last week cruelly announces savage cuts to disabled people's mobility assistance. The austerity agenda, which the government of the apology to the Magdalenes is pushing relentlessly through, is slashing living standards, is driving hundreds of thousands of people out of this country, is attacking people with special needs, is doing enormous damage to our society. That agenda is being carried out at the diktat of the financial markets, the bankers, and the bondholders. So we have the same capitalist system, we have the same crisis manifested in a different way as to the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But we have deputies and ministers marching into the stall, apologising for the cruelty of that day, while they're imposing the cruelty of today, demanded by the system that exists and to which they bend the knee. So let's concorle. One of the lessons separately, apart from recognising the hypocrisy what's afoot here, is that the separation of church and state is critical, and that is a task that is still not carried out. The schools must be under total democratic control of parents, of community, of pupils where that's appropriate. But still, in this day and age, we have, for example, in West Dublin, in Tyrrellstown, probably the most ethnically diverse and religiously diverse area in Irish society, the Department of Education is insisting that a new school yet to be built, a secondary school, should be a Catholic-led secondary school. Utterly, utterly inappropriate. So have the lessons been learned in reality? Or is it simply a matter of lip service for political expediency to satisfy the demand for justice and the demand for recompense that is the view of a huge majority of our people? What lessons have really been learned by this government?